going through my life as a clinician, as a mother, as a wife, but this whole part of myself is kind of under a tourniquet, and once I was able to release that and go back to those spaces and look, I'm fuller. I'm just more, the Army had a commercial, be all that you could be. Well, I wasn't able to be all that I could be until I had really went in and reconciled with my own story and claimed all those painful parts, because I got the joyful parts back along with it.
This is the Visible Voices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Resa Lewiss, emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine physician, medical educator, author, health techie, and your host. Today's guest is Dr. Shanda McManus, family medicine physician and narrative medicine educator. She is the author of Brother Epistles, published 2026 by Split Lip Press, and this is the focus of our conversation today. In 1992, Shanda's brother Monir was killed in a drive-by shooting in North Philadelphia. He was 20 years old. 30 years later, Shanda began writing him letters. She writes as both sister and physician, blending memory, social commentary, and collective history. Shanda, welcome to the Visible Voices podcast.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for welcoming me in. I can't wait to talk to you.
Listeners may not be familiar with what is narrative medicine and what does one do when one teaches narrative medicine.
Okay, so narrative medicine was really pioneered by Dr. Rita Sharon out of Columbia. She's an internist and also she had a PhD in literature. And what she found was a lot of her patients were complaining that their doctors just didn't listen. So drawing on her literature background, she said, stories have been around forever, and maybe we can use stories to make better physicians, to make patients more satisfied, and even in the end, maybe advocate for changes in the health system. So that was the start of it. So basically, it's using stories within healthcare medicine. That's the simplest way I can explain it. And so what that looks like when you're teaching is really teaching students how to listen. That's a fundamental skill of any physician, how to listen. And we can use literature and other things outside of healthcare to increase our capacity to listen and to feel empathy for others whose experiences may be way different from our own. And another thing is to reflect on the experiences we have in medicine, actually sitting down to write or journal as a way to integrate all the things we encounter as docs where we don't have any place to go with those feelings. So going to the page in the paper is really a great place to explore that and to be, I think, more well-rounded when we go into the next clinical encounter, when we see the next patient.
Do you yourself have a long history of going to the paper and writing things down?
Oh, this is so funny. So I think of myself first as a reader. I loved to read as a kid. The library was a huge escape. When I went to college, I majored in English, even though I knew I wanted to be a doctor because I just love stories and reading, but I wasn't really like a writer or going to the page. I just liked consuming it, getting inside of other people's stories. And so fast forward a lot of years ahead, I'm a busy mom. I have 5 kids. I'm running here and yon. I'm working. And I just kind of felt like I didn't have space for myself in my own life. And I drove past a little lawn sign that said community writing class, 6 weeks one summer. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to try.
Love it.
And that was really my first foray into writing. And what I was writing about was like all my experiences growing up inside and outside of medicine. And I just felt more whole, more of myself because I was able to go in and kind of claim my whole story through writing it.
Yeah. Your book. Brother Epistles. I love the word epistle. I took Latin in high
Me
school.
too.
Epistulae.
Yeah, me too. I had Latin in high school.
So I love the title. And it's a memoir. and you decided to write your memoir and to speak about your brother Monir via letters. Why? Why that form? Why that medium?
I think that that's really interesting because before this book, I had just been writing traditional prose. I had written a draft basically covering our childhood. You know, a lot of things happened. But immediately after I finished that draft, I just wanted to talk to my brother about like our experiences growing up. I'm like, he's the only other person that knows how it was growing up in that house, having all those things happen. And I was just writing letters. Just it, you know, the letter form is very intimate, it's very conversational, it's not formal. It seems to be able to access a really special space that I think is hard to get to with other forms of prose. It pulls the reader in immediately. And it just, for me, it just felt like an authentic way to talk to my brother. And so after I was writing, you know, I had written like dozens of them. A friend of mine said, you know, I think this might be a book. And I really hadn't thought of it as a book, but there I was with this collection of things that, hey, might be a book.
At the end of your book are letters your brother wrote to you. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't expect that. I was delighted to see it and to read them. And I'm going to say, he had really neat penmanship.
Yes, yes. We both went to Catholic school in Philadelphia, and the sisters made sure your penmanship was on point. So we
And,
both benefited from
and
that.
you were allowed to write lefty?
You know, they did allow it, but it was, you know, by the time I was in the system, kind of like in the 80s, it was no longer acceptable to correct people. But we knew who all the left-handed people were in the class. So,
That is so funny. And for
yeah.
listeners, audience members that are wondering, both of us are lefties. We're both left-handed and we write lefty. The memoir itself spans generations of loss. Yes,
Mhm.
it's the loss, the killing of your brother, but there's your grandmother, your mother, Monir, your brother. And in the final chapter, you reveal about your great nephew who would have been Munir's grandson.
Yeah, you know, that is something, you know, loss is not isolated within a family, right? Everything is connected within a family, within a community, right? And personally, I just felt that there was an accumulation that really affects you how each loss feels, you know? It's one thing, you know, if I just lose my mother to ovarian cancer when I'm 14. But then it's another 3 years later, I lose my grandmother, who's like a mother to me, on top of that. So all of a sudden, each loss is larger and more magnified, you know? And I think, you know, I read some statistics that Black children are 3 times as likely to lose a parent in childhood when compared to white children. Black adults before age 30 experience 3 significant family losses, you know, so what is that doing? I think it's opening up the space and conversation. Our grief may look different just because there's been an accumulation of you know, collected grief. So you just need to make space for that, you know? If you're talking to someone who's lost one significant person, the conversation with someone else who's lost 3 is different and should be acknowledged in the way you support that person and talk with that person.
The word that came to mind to me was compounding. There's a compounding
Mhm.
effect.
Yeah.
This is a time that I'll say I was really struck. You've said this to me. I read this, that by the age of 22, you had planned 3 funerals.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I thought, wow, I must be cursed or what with, you know, but then you grow up and you read and you talk to other people and, you know, I know this person, you know, there are 2 people in that family, there are 3 people in this family. And then you just start thinking better than your own small experience and enlarging it to other people and saying, hey, this is not accidental. Maybe this is structural, you know, and that moves us into health outcomes, structural disparities, you know, more chronic disease burden, more violent crimes, other types of things that are going into compounding these losses for a particular group of people.
Continuing with this med school thread, you wrote med school is a great place to escape from real life. Feelings and other people are put aside with the words, gotta study.
Yes.
Somehow I did study. It was like an amnesic elixir that helped me forget everything else. I lost myself in pathology and diseases of the body. Something about all that corruption held my attention. I know. Only a nerd like me would say that.
Yes, you've been a trainee, a medical student going through, and there is a culture of just focusing on the work, on the medicine, on the patient, on the next thing you have to do. Um, of course, we're professionals, we're learning, we want to bring our whole selves, but there's a whole human side to each of us that we can be encouraged not to deal with it. Physicians have some of the highest divorce rates, some of the highest suicide rates. So you have to ask why. And I think this culture of not living that whole other side of your life outside of the clinic, outside of the hospital floors, outside of the ER, where you're caring for other people in your life or not caring for them, handling, traumatic experiences, handling things like depression or substance use. I think that there needs to be space for physicians and other healthcare professionals that feel like they can deal with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a decade of life that we step out of mainstream society to train. And then
Mhm,
when you're finished, you wake up and you realize many other people have had things in their personal lives, whether
mhm.
it's partnerships, whether it's children, whether it's buying a house, whether it's getting a job. There is this focus on the training and what's happening in the institution of medicine, in healthcare, that sometimes is really hard to explain to people. And I believe one of the things you highlight is it's a great place to escape.
Yeah, great, and people will take your excuse. "Oh, you can't come to a funeral because you have to study? Oh, we understand." Or, "You can't make this event," or, "You can't," and you kinda have a shield for maybe dealing with some stuff that maybe you don't wanna deal with.
Yeah.
Your partner is like, "Hey, I need more from you," and you're like, "Hey, I gotta study." That's gonna have to wait. So I just think, we need to be honest about what happens to us and maybe kind of move towards allowing more space.
You write a lot about grief and your experience with grief, which I think you make some universal statements that are true, that grief isn't a lone thing.
hmm
Your experience was that it wasn't this series of steps, it was actually a repeating loop with a spiral.
Yeah, I think for me, like the book represents that shape of grief. So the center point is, my brother being killed. But then we move back through time, like our childhoods together. I move into my present, which is way his future, and we're going back and forth, and I think for me, that's the shape of grief. Like I remember our times together and then our future apart and where I am in the present. And I think that listen, I think the 5 stages of grief, and that was really important work, but it's not that simple. It's not tidy. It's messy. I can be at my daughter's wedding and then I want to bust out crying because my brother's not there, right? That's a legitimate thing, even though it's happened in 1992 and we're here today. So I think that I really wanted to share that perspective and let people who have grief experience understand that that's okay.
Yeah.
They're not abnormal, and that kinda how it works.
Why the time period from 1992 was when he died by gun violence, and this book is coming out almost 30 years later.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting. Like I said before, I had always been like a reader, and I wasn't until I was at this, middle-aged part of my life and, looking for space for myself, but I also think for me is I finally had the economic stability, the emotional support. My husband's doing great, I have great children. I felt like I had a certain amount of psychological safety that I could go back into these places and really kind of like face it.
Yeah.
Where before when I was a medical student, I was struggling just to stay a medical student. I had come from the poorest zip code in North Philly. So just to be there. So I didn't feel that I had a place that I could face the loss or I could go there or, hey, I might be lost. If I go there, I might just fall into this abyss of I don't even know what. So for me, that big, almost 3 decades or more period was, okay, now I've gotten to a place where I feel personally safe in all these ways that I can go back and look at this really scary, hurtful thing.
You and I overlap in thinking about determinants of health. Part of it
Mhm.
is we're both doctors, we went through,
Yeah.
but it's more than that. It is from stories, it is from reading, but it is from understanding different outcomes for different communities. And one of the determinants of health is housing. And you
Mhm.
talk about different homes, houses in which you grew up, and your home now, and that daily, ready exposure to green and to nature.
Mhm. Yeah, that is a big, I think, a undervalued determinant of health. When you live somewhere where you can see trees and flowers and hear birds, there is something that happens physiologically in your body that's a benefit. You know, you have space to breathe and to just have a calming. Flip side, where I grew up in North Philly, it was very little. There's trash on the streets. There's crowded. There's very little beauty if you're just walking to and from the corner store. I was fortunate. My dad would take us to Fairmount Park. There is a big public park in Philadelphia, but we had to get in the car, we had to drive there, we had to be at the park. It wasn't accessible from my block or from my neighborhood. And I think that that is a very important being able to interact with beauty and nature, um, is associated with better health outcomes.
And relatedly, you've described systems that failed Monir and
Mhm.
that contributed to his dying at the age of 20.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I felt like when my brother died, that people blamed him for his own murder. Oh, he shouldn't have been this. He shouldn't have been at that place. But there was very little compassion or empathy or understanding for why was he there? Why did he make that decision? And I think that the lack of economic opportunities for young Black men like my brother, that lack of support, um, what he could see was like, oh, I could do this business venture and, for a little while and be moved somewhere else. So I just really wanted to kind of tease out some of those things. Um, he went into the army, because his girlfriend was expecting a baby. He wanted to provide. He was only 17, and my dad had to sign for him to be able to go, but he went because he wanted to support work. And one of the first things he said to me about the army was, if you're not white, it's not right. So, as soon as he could, he wanted to get out,
Yeah.
even after going to Iraq and doing that whole thing. So you have to look at like the choices someone is presented with and why would they go this path,
Mhm.
you know? And I just wanted to talk a little bit about those things and how often young Black men are perceived by outsiders.
Do you think these letters, your stories, this memoir is giving people an aha? Do you think there's a little bit of understanding that wasn't there before?
That's what my hope is, and that's the hope in sharing this very, very personal work because I want people to feel that, one, my brother's a person, not a statistic, a whole breadth of human experience. He had a sister and we had a relationship and he had sons. And this is what, um, outside of the headline, this is what a life looks like that was lost to gun violence. And I feel like if people can just feel like a tiny bit of that, maybe there'll be more awareness, more inclination to get involved, to support the interventions that we know can help and avoid this outcome for
Yeah.
other people.
It's not by mistake that you're on the Visible Voices podcast, and in your memoir, you talk about OV, original voice. And I definitely, you're chuckling. I was chuckling because I was like, oh, this is perfect. We're going to talk about this. So this is a subtle, not so subtle thing that some people are aware of, some people aren't, that, we often have to silence our voice, change our voice, adjust our voice. You wrote, to get ahead, it would be necessary to silence parts of myself. So when did you realize you had a voice, and when did you start using your voice?
Oh, that is a great question. Okay, so the first time I really realized that, oh, your voice can have an effect or make people think of you. When I was 16, I worked at a little independent radio station.
Cool.
And one day the receptionist was like, okay, I want you to answer the phones because I'm going to be in a meeting. But she said, don't use that streety Philly girl voice. And I was just like, what? I mean, never occurred to me. That's just the way I grew up talking. So I was like, oh, this is a place. And then you move into these professional spaces, medical school, and you realize, oh, I need to be a little conscious, filter out some words or some slangs and listen until you can figure out how to speak in these spaces so you're accepted and respected within them, and I just, the need to have to do that, to have to code switch, to get ahead, to make progress is something that maybe some people don't really experience or know what that feels like. And then sometimes you stay silent. Some voices within you say silent so long, you're like, can I ever even go back there? Or you run into someone who knew you before all this as a teenager, and you're just like, wow, I wonder how I sound, you know? So yeah, I just think that that's one of the, internal, like not as well seen or understood sacrifices that often you have to make if you're part of a certain group and a community, to be able to kind of pull yourself up.
One of the voices that I detected in the memoir was the voice of forgiveness. You forgiving yourself for perhaps times you felt you failed to protect Monir.
Hmm.
There was a scene at a birthday party where he was bitten by a dog, and even up to 1992. And I'm wondering where you are with that forgiveness and that feeling responsible.
Yeah, I think that's, as the oldest, me and my brother were a year and a half apart, you're automatically assigned a position of like caretaking, which was fine, but now looking back, that incident with the dog, I was 5 years old, you know?
Yeah.
So when you start to gain some distance and perspective, you could see, maybe, that might not have been a total reasonable responsibility for me to feel. Not
Right.
that others put it on me, but I just felt that, and to give myself a little grace. But I think when you lose someone close, there's a survivor's guilt. Why am I here and you're not? We grew up in the same house. And so I accept that that's a natural way to feel, but it's not necessarily a truth or a fact, but it's a feeling I have,
Yeah.
which is okay.
Something that just came to mind, I read that there's a very high percentage of firstborn daughters that become doctors.
It tracks. You just automatically are that firstborn. And,
Yeah.
I had a very elevated place in my family. When my mother was ill, I was like her right hand person from ages 10 to 14. Like, you know, I helped with the colostomy bag. I knew about the tube feedings. I would go to the pharmacy and the electric company, you know, planning the funeral. I was 14. So when you get some distance, you just say, okay,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
were a kid. You were a
Yeah.
kid, you know?
Yeah. How are you different having written this book?
Oh, you know what? This is kind of like, I think one of the biggest things that I'm thankful for is that I feel like I'm more myself, because was so painful losing my brother. I just shut off that whole thing, right? Because every time I would think of him, I would think about how he died,
Yeah.
you know? But that cut me off from all our joy, from our connection to the person he was, from being that sister. And so, I'm going through my life as a clinician, as a mother, as a wife, but this whole part of myself is kinda under a tourniquet, and once I was able to release that and go back to those spaces and look, I'm fuller. I'm just more, the Army had a commercial, "Be all that you could be." Well, I wasn't able to be all that I could be until I had really went in and reconciled with my own story and claimed all those painful parts, because I got the joyful parts back along with it.
What would Monir say if he read the book?
Sean, you're so crazy. Just, you know what? I don't know, but I would hope, and my brother was always a biggest cheerleader, he would be proud of me. I
Yeah.
just know that. But that is a reason why I kind of included his letters at the end because I wanted him to be able to say something in his own words, you know, because the book is written from my perspective and my take. So putting his letters at the end gives you a little bit of taste of who he was, you
Yeah.
know.
What do you hope audience members take from our conversation?
I think that I would hope that people gain courage or, and going back into their own stories and the things that might be really, really hurtful and say, okay, how can I go back into this story and claim both the joy and the suffering to be better integrated as a person, as a human, as I go into all my roles? Or if I feel like I can't go to those places, what can I do to help myself feel supported so that I can?
So, I'd love us to leave the audience with some small actions or behaviors audience members can take from our conversation if they want to start today acting, moving towards something with narrative medicine, something with gun violence prevention advocacy, something with healing their own grief. Give some really small actionable behaviors.
I think something that kind of can touch on all three is journal. Just keep a little tiny notebook, and I'm like a traditional pen and paper kind of person, but
Yeah.
you can write notes in your phone of anything that comes up for you during your day, you know? Or if you have a particular encounter, whether clinical or otherwise, what was it about that? Start writing, not thinking about who's going to see it, if I'm going to publish it, just to see what you feel about the thing. Self exploration, pen and paper. I would think that that was the simplest thing. I keep some sticky notes in my car and I'll just write on them, just whatever. If I see something that catches my attention on the road or a thought that just pops up, I'll just write it down.
Yeah. There is no month for gun violence prevention, and we're orange. June happens to be Gun Violence Prevention Month. So, if there's something in the advocacy space that people would like to take action on, is there small behavior you could name?
Yeah, I think find out what's going on in your local community. There's a lot of, in Pennsylvania, there's Ceasefire, PA, there's bigger organizations, Moms Bonded by Grief. Find out what conversations, what activities and events are going around in your community in and around Gun Violence Prevention Month. Look for those, support them, go to the talks, go to the marches, um, be a part of the conversation.
You have shared generously ways that you have addressed your grief, be it writing, be it nature, be it surrounding yourself with love of family. Is there any surprising tincture that has helped with your grief?
Sure, surprising. I think that I know it sounds cliche, but time I think not that it heals it, but it allows you to get enough distance that you can go back and look at it. Sometimes when you're in what I would say acute, you just can't reflect on it. You're just trying to get through the next minute, next hour, next day. But time will pass. And one day you'll have the thought like I had. I said, not many people are going to ever remember my brother, me and my dad. But what about after that? You know? And so you're kind of hit with um, that length of time that's passed. Okay, well, let me sit back and go back there and let me record it. Let me bear witness to his life, to who he was, what he was to me and other people.
For listeners and viewers that want to follow along your professional journey, your writing journey, and just follow your work, what's the best way to keep in touch?
Oh, check me out on my website, which is just my name, ShandaMcManus.com. I also have a Substack newsletters where I talk about weathering, health of Black women, different issues, but my website is the best place to find out about all the things. Speaking engagements, narrative medicine work, my book, and I'd be happy, to talk with anybody that's interested in this work or has any other questions for me.
All the good stuff.
Mhm.
Shanda, what do you think the title of our episode should be?
The title, I guess Letters to the Unreachable, you can think about it, something like that, because I really do feel like the letter form helped me reach across this impossible space that death creates, and so I think that form, can really be something that can help anyone wherever they are.
Dr. Shanda McManus, thank you for joining me on the Visible Voices podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a blast. Great to talk to you.
The Visible Voices podcast amplifies voices in the healthcare, equity, and innovation spaces. Our team includes Dr. Giuliano DePortu and me, Dr. Resa Lewiss. Find me at Resa Lewiss MD on social media or visit thevisiblevoicespodcast.com. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts and watch our episodes on YouTube. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and guests are their own and do not reflect those of their employers or institutions. Guest appearances do not imply endorsement of any product, service, or organization. Information shared here is intended for general informational purposes only, reflects the time of recording, and should never substitute for clinical judgment or individualized medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is created by listening to or watching this podcast. Together, we're making healthcare more equitable, one visible voice at a time.